"Mother, I've returned," said the lost princess, "and this human is the one who protected me." The stars stretched across the sky like scattered jewels, glimmering over the mining world of Corrales, a small, forgotten planet on the edge of human-controlled space. The winds blew through the rocky canyons, whispering over abandoned mining equipment and rusting towers, carrying the sound of solitude for miles. For most, Corrales was nothing more than a speck of dust in the galaxy, but for one small pod drifting through its atmosphere, it was the difference between life and death. Inside the pod, the princess stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing the deep violet irises that marked her as the daughter of the Queen of Stars, a ruler whose empire spanned hundreds of worlds. She had been missing for nearly a decade, believed dead by those who knew her, a ghost in the galaxy's history. Yet here she was, alive, though battered, weak, and terrified. Her body was bruised from the crash, and her mind reeled with confusion. She did not remember everything, only fragments, flashes of stars, the hum of alien ships, a hand reaching for hers before darkness had claimed her. The pod hissed and groaned as it settled among the jagged rocks, smoke curling from the damaged engines. Outside, the world was silent. There were no patrols, no scanners, no one to rescue her, and perhaps no one who even cared. She had survived long enough to be alone again. Fear tried to take her heart, but she forced herself to breathe. Survival was all she had left. A shadow moved across the jagged rocks, careful and deliberate. From the distance, a figure approached, carrying nothing but a small pack and a tool belt. He was human, ordinary in every sense, yet he walked as though nothing in the galaxy could make him pause. His eyes scanned the crash site, calculating yet gentle. He saw the pod first and then the figure inside, slumped against the control panel. Without hesitation, he moved closer. He did not hesitate because he thought it was his duty. He did not hesitate because he knew what she was. He hesitated because something within him, a stubborn spark of human instinct, told him she needed help. When he reached the pod, he examined the hull and found a panel that could be opened without cutting through metal. With patient hands, he lifted the latch, and the pod door creaked open. The princess shrank back instinctively, the strange shapes of his hands and the sound of his voice alien to her. She raised her hands in caution, expecting weapons or threats, but he only offered water and warmth. "You're safe," he said in his simple, clear voice. "I won't hurt you." The words were like a balm she did not know she needed. She hesitated for a moment, torn between trust and fear, before allowing herself to be helped out. The human supported her, steadying her with an ease that surprised her. She expected cold calculations or self-interest, but there was none. There was only calm, and a strange sense of reassurance she had never felt among her own people. Humans were so young, so inexperienced in the ways of the galaxy, yet something about him told her they were capable of something even older, something older than empires or fleets, the capacity to care without expectation. He led her to a small shelter he had built near the rocks, a crude yet functional place with walls of metal sheets and glass salvaged from old mining stations. Inside, it was warm. The fire he lit cast flickering shadows across the walls, and for the first time in years she felt her racing heart begin to slow. He offered her food, simple rations, and water. She took them slowly, still suspicious, still uncertain, but she did not refuse. Over the next few hours, as she regained some strength, she learned to observe him. He was human, yes, but his mind was not ordinary. He solved problems without panic. He noticed details others would have missed, and he moved as if he expected danger but did not fear it. And in the quiet moments, he spoke not of wars or power, but of small things. The smell of rain on Corrales, the way the rocks caught the sun at dawn, the small joys of a life lived simply. She had been raised among rulers, among generals and scholars, yet she had never known such patience or thoughtfulness. Among humans, she realized, there was a quiet strength. It was not the strength of armies or weapons, but the strength of the mind and the heart, the refusal to give up even when the galaxy would say it is pointless. The night stretched long, and the stars above seemed to recognize her presence, twinkling with a familiarity that reminded her of home. She whispered to the human almost instinctively, I am a princess. My mother, the Queen of Stars, she will know I am lost." Her voice trembled, though not from fear alone. Years of wandering, of hiding, of surviving alone had left scars deeper than any wound. The human nodded, accepting the truth without judgment or surprise. "Then we will get you home," he said simply. No one in her life had ever made such a promise without a hint of self-interest. No one had ever made her feel that survival was not about duty or fear, but about being cared for. She felt a tear slide down her cheek. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel hope. Not the fragile hope of her youth, but a strong, defiant hope that perhaps she could survive, not only because she was a princess, but because she had someone who believed in her without question. Days passed, and the human helped her recover. He crafted splints for her injuries, sourced clean water from underground streams, and even rigged a communication array from scavenged parts in case the galaxy was still listening. In these moments, she saw more clearly the extraordinary nature of humans. They were fragile in appearance, yes, but unyielding in spirit. They survived not because of brute force, but because they refused to surrender to fear, to despair, or to expectation. One morning, as the sun rose over the jagged horizon, she felt strong enough to stand on her own. She gazed out at the expanse of corals, the gray and orange rocks stretching endlessly. For years, she had dreamed of returning home, of walking again among the stars, yet the reality of being alive now felt both alien and exhilarating. She turned to the human, ready to speak, but found him already watching her with a quiet intensity that made her heart skip. I owe you my life," she said, her voice steadying. "I do not even know your name." He smiled lightly. "Names are simple, actions are not. You'll remember me by what I do, not what I am called." For a moment, she understood something profound. In a galaxy that measured worth by titles, fleets, and victories, this human measured worth differently. By kindness, by courage, by refusing to abandon someone when all others had. That was a kind of power she had never known, and yet it felt older and wiser than anything in her royal upbringing. And as she stood there, the first full day of her return, a subtle realization settled in her mind. Perhaps humanity was not weak, not insignificant, not ordinary. Perhaps humans were capable of the impossible, not through armies or technology, but through heart, will, and determination. Perhaps they were capable of protecting something precious in a way no empire could understand. Yet the galaxy was still watching. Far beyond corals, forces moved in silence, unaware that their intended prey had survived. The princess's survival was not an accident, nor was it luck. It was the human's choice to act, to protect, to defy expectation. And in that simple choice, a ripple began that would shake the foundations of empires and rewrite what the galaxy thought it knew about humanity. The night came again, and with it, quiet stars over corals. The princess sat beside the human, looking at the horizon, feeling for the first time in years that she was not entirely alone. Somewhere in the galaxy, her mother, the Queen of Stars, wondered if she was alive. And somewhere in that same galaxy, humans, small, young, untested, were beginning to show that they were not to be underestimated. The lost princess had returned, but she had not returned alone. And that human, simple in appearance, ordinary in every outward measure, had become the first guardian of a story the galaxy would never forget. The princess had spent her first night on corals watching the stars, listening to the wind whisper across the jagged rocks. The human had gone about his work quietly, repairing small instruments, checking their water supply, and preparing rations for the coming days. She could sense his focus, not just on survival, but on her safety. There was something remarkable about this human. He did not act like the soldiers or advisors of her own empire, who constantly calculated loyalty and power. He acted from instinct, from something deep inside that seemed older than any law or order. By the second day, the princess could stand and walk without the support of the human, though she moved carefully. He watched her silently, a steady presence, offering guidance only when necessary. Every step she took reminded her of how fragile life could be, and how unexpected her survival truly was. She had expected only to fade into the darkness of forgotten history, but here, among the winds and rocks, she was alive and protected. The human was unlike anyone she had ever met. He did not speak of titles or past glories, nor did he question her role as a princess. Instead, he focused on the immediate, on what needed to be done to survive in a world that did not care about her identity. He showed her how to collect clean water from underground streams, how to identify safe food among the sparse vegetation, and how to build simple defenses to alert them if danger approached. She began to understand the subtle brilliance of humanity. Where her own empire relied on overwhelming technology and rigid hierarchies, The human relied on observation, patience, and adaptability. He was not stronger than any trained soldier she had known, yet he moved and acted in ways that made him nearly impossible to challenge. There was an intelligence in his simplicity, and a courage that did not seek reward or recognition. On the third day, as she helped him reinforce their shelter against the ever-blowing winds, she asked him the question that had been growing inside her mind. "Why do you help me?" she asked softly. "You do not know me, and yet you risk your own safety. Why?" The human paused, setting down a beam and wiping his hands. He looked at her, calm and unafraid. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one deserves to be left to die if I can prevent it. That is all the reason I need." The words struck her deeply. In all her life, no one had ever acted solely because it was right. Even her mother, wise and just, was bound by duty, law, and the endless calculations of empire. This human, small and ordinary, acted freely from compassion. For the first time, she began to understand what humans were capable of. They could defy expectation, not because they were strong, but because they refused to surrender to fear or indifference. As the days passed, the princess's strength returned. She began exploring the small region around their shelter, under the watchful eye of the human. The planet was harsh, but it had beauty in its simplicity. The way the sunlight glinted off the rocks, the quiet songs of unseen birds, the distant shimmer of underground streams. She realized that survival was not merely enduring, it was noticing the life that persisted even in hardship. One afternoon, as they rested beside a small stream, the princess noticed movement on a ridge above them. At first, she thought it was wildlife, but the human's calm voice warned her to stay still. He did not panic, did not raise his weapon aggressively. Instead, he observed carefully, calculating the approach and timing. Soon, a small group of scouts appeared, hunters from a distant alien empire who had been tracking her for months. They did not yet know she had survived, only that she was missing. The princess's heart raced, but the human's presence calmed her. "Do not fear," he whispered. "We are ready." Unlike the soldiers she had grown up with, who would have rushed headlong into confrontation, the human guided her to a natural ridge behind them, where they could remain hidden. Using simple mirrors and reflections of the sun, he created small illusions, misleading the scouts into thinking the area was empty. When one of them approached closer, he used the natural sound of rocks and wind to mask their movements, and the scout moved on, unaware of their presence. The princess could hardly believe what she had witnessed. The scouts were trained, technologically advanced, yet they had been outsmarted by one human and the terrain. The human explained calmly, "You do not need weapons to survive. You need observation, patience, and the courage to act when it matters. The galaxy thinks humans are weak. They are wrong." The incident left her both astonished and inspired. Her understanding of humanity deepened. They were not ordinary, they were underestimated. Their strength was subtle, invisible to those who measured power by fleets or armies. Humans survived, she realized, by refusing to give up, by thinking, by adapting, and most importantly, by protecting each other without question. Over the next week, the princess and the human continued to strengthen their position. They improved the shelter, found new sources of food, and set up early warning systems using reflective surfaces and small devices scavenged from abandoned mining stations. The princess began to take part in these preparations, not as a royal with orders, but as someone who wanted to learn, to understand, and to survive alongside her protector. One night, as the twin moons of Corallis rose above the horizon, the princess spoke quietly. "I have survived so long alone," she said, "but I would have died without you. You have given me more than life. You have given me hope." The human only nodded, staring at the moons. "Hope is what keeps humans going," he said simply. "We survive because we hope, even when everything says we cannot." Her eyes filled with tears. She had been raised among stars and empires, yet she had never known hope like this. She began to understand the true power of humanity, not their weapons or technology, but their resilience, their loyalty, their unyielding determination to do what is right. She realized that this human, who had no obligation to her, had changed her life in ways no empire could. The days turned into weeks. The scouts did not return, but the princess knew that her enemies were still out there, waiting, calculating. Yet she no longer felt helpless. With the human, she had learned patience, observation, and subtlety. She had learned that even a single human could make the galaxy think twice, that courage did not require strength, and that loyalty could be more powerful than any fleet. One afternoon, as they rested in the shade of a jagged rock formation, the princess looked at him with quiet admiration. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," she said. "The galaxy would never believe what you have done to protect me." He smiled faintly. "Let them not believe," he said. "Let them underestimate us. That is their mistake." She thought of her mother, the Queen of Stars, and of the empire that had lost her. For the first time, she wondered what it would mean to return, not as a princess who had survived by chance, but as a princess who had been protected, guided, and inspired by a human. She wondered how her mother would see the human who had defied expectation, who had acted from instinct and morality rather than duty or ambition. She wondered how the galaxy would react to a species it had underestimated for centuries. At night, as they lay beside the fire, the princess whispered to herself, "Perhaps humans are not weak. Perhaps they are what the galaxy needs most." The human, hearing her words, only glanced at her silently, as if he already understood the truth. Humans were young, yes, but they were unshakable in ways empires could never measure. They survived, adapted, and protected what mattered most. In that quiet understanding, the princess felt a bond grow stronger than any she had known. A bond not of duty, not of politics, but of trust, respect, and the unspoken knowledge that together they could face anything. And somewhere far across the stars, forces moved, unaware that the princess was no longer alone. They did not yet know that she was protected, that a single human had already changed the course of their plans. They did not know that the galaxy's oldest expectations of power, strength, and dominance were about to be challenged by something new, something subtle, something unstoppable: humanity. For the first time in years, the princess felt safe. She felt capable. She felt alive. And she knew with certainty that she had not merely survived. She had begun to understand a power unlike any she had ever known, a power that did not require empires or weapons, only courage, patience, and the willingness to protect another with all your heart. Corallis was still a lonely world, and the galaxy still vast and dangerous, but she was no longer alone. She had a protector, a guide, and an example of a species that refused to be underestimated. She had learned the quiet, defiant strength of humans. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning. The princess had begun to regain her confidence. Each morning, she walked further from the shelter, exploring the rocky landscapes of Corallis with the human at her side. She observed how he interacted with the environment, how he noticed the tiniest details, a faint shift in the wind, a barely visible trace in the sand, and used them to anticipate danger. She realized that survival was not about strength or advanced tools, but about intelligence, patience, and awareness. Humans had a way of seeing the world others missed, a way of finding paths that even the most advanced scanners could not detect. Yet Corallis was only a small corner of the galaxy. She knew the forces that had sought to capture her were still out there, moving in silence, calculating, and expecting her to be helpless. They did not yet know that she had a human protector, nor that the human had learned to think like the hunter they were. One evening, as the twin moons rose high in the sky, the princess asked the human about the larger galaxy. "Do they know I am alive?" she asked. "They will," he replied quietly. "But not yet, and that gives us time to prepare, to understand, and to survive. The galaxy thinks survival is about power, weapons, or fleets. It is not. Survival is about being clever, patient, and willing to protect what matters. That is why humans last." She listened, fascinated. In her life, empires measured power by fleets, by technology, by dominance. Humans measured it differently. They measured it by choices, by loyalty, by courage in the face of impossible odds. The human before her had no grand army, no exotic technology, and no inherited title. But he had something more important: the ability to act when it mattered, without hesitation. Over the next several days, they worked to make their shelter even more secure. The human constructed simple but effective warning systems using reflections and small devices. He taught the princess how to use natural materials to create subtle signals and camouflage. She was amazed at how effective they were, how a few clever choices could make a small human and a lost princess nearly invisible to even the most determined scouts. One morning, as they rested near a stream, she noticed movement in the distance. Not predators, not the wind, but alien figures, scanning, searching. Her heart leapt, but the human remained calm. "Watch," he whispered. "Do not move. Let them come close enough and they will make mistakes. The galaxy has underestimated humans for centuries. That is their weakness." She observed in silence as the scouts approached, their movements cautious but confident. They assumed she was alone and unprotected, but the human had anticipated this. He had set small, reflective markers that shifted sunlight to create illusions of movement, making the scouts think the terrain was empty. When one of them approached too closely, the human used a small, timed sound device to mimic rocks shifting underfoot, directing the scouts away. Each movement was subtle, almost invisible, yet perfectly timed. The princess was amazed. These were elite scouts, trained for years to find and capture targets. Yet a single human had outsmarted them, using only intelligence, patience, and understanding of the environment. "This is incredible," she whispered. You are not ordinary." The human smiled faintly. "Ordinary is what the galaxy believes," he said. "The mistake they make is assuming ordinary is weak." For the first time, the princess understood what it meant to be underestimated. Humans were young, yes, technologically inferior, yes, but they possessed something that no empire, no fleet, no machine could replicate: instinct, creativity, and unshakable courage. They could survive where others would fail, not by brute force, but by refusing to give up and by acting when it mattered most. As the days turned into weeks, the princess grew stronger, more confident, and more aware of the human's subtle teachings. She learned to observe, to anticipate, to think several steps ahead. She began to understand that the galaxy's greatest mistake was not underestimating her, but underestimating humans. Even without armies or weapons, humans could shift the balance of power simply by refusing to surrender. One evening, as the sky turned deep indigo and the first stars appeared, the princess and the human watched from a high ridge. Below them, the terrain stretched endlessly, dotted with jagged rocks and hidden valleys. "Do you ever fear them?" she asked. "The empire that took me, the fleets that search for me?" The human shook his head. "Fear is wasted energy," he said. "You survive by being aware, by planning, by protecting what matters. Fear only slows you down. Humans survive because they act, even when fear is present. That is what makes us strong." She thought about that carefully. The galaxy had taught her that strength came from armies, titles, and fleets. She had learned the hard way that those things could vanish in an instant. But humans measured strength differently. Strength was courage. Strength was loyalty. Strength was refusing to give up, even when all hope seemed lost. Days later, the scouts returned. They had learned something, perhaps from intercepted messages, perhaps from rumors, but the princess and the human were ready. The human had learned to anticipate patterns, to create illusions, to make the environment work for them instead of against them. The scouts approached, confident in their advantage, yet every move they made was subtly countered. They could not locate the princess. They could not trap the human. They grew frustrated, eventually leaving without even realizing they had failed. The princess watched in awe. How did you do that?" she asked. The human shrugged. "By refusing to act like everyone else expects. By using what you have instead of what you wish you had. Humans survive because we think differently. That is our power." She realized that he was right. Empires might have technology, fleets, and centuries of history, but humans had something more important: ingenuity, courage, and an unshakable spirit. Humans could not be measured by conventional standards, and that made them unpredictable. That made them dangerous to anyone who assumed weakness equaled inferiority. One night, as the moons rose and cast silver light over Corrales, the princess spoke quietly. "I have survived for years alone, but I would have died without you. You have given me more than life. You have given me understanding, courage, and hope." The human looked at her, his expression calm. "Hope is what humans survive on," he said. "We act because it is right, even when the galaxy says it is impossible. You survived because of that. I only gave a little guidance. The rest came from your will to live." She realized he was right. Survival was not about the power of empires or titles. Survival was about refusing to give up, about acting in the moment, and about protecting what mattered most. Humans had mastered that instinct, and it was stronger than any weapon she had ever known. The following days were spent preparing for possible encounters. The princess learned to navigate the rocky terrain, to hide in plain sight, and to trust the human's guidance. Each day, she became more capable, more aware, and more confident. She no longer saw herself as a helpless princess. She saw herself as someone who had survived impossible odds because of human ingenuity, loyalty, and courage. By the time the scouts had left for the final time, the princess had realized something profound. The galaxy had underestimated humans for centuries, assuming they were weak, disorganized, and simple. But she had witnessed their strength, not in numbers or technology, but in courage, intelligence, and morality. A single human had protected her, outsmarted elite forces, and shown her that the impossible could be achieved without a fleet or a weapon. And as she looked at him quietly, the princess understood something even more important. Humans could not be measured by what they lacked. They could only be measured by what they could do, by their choices, and by their willingness to act when it mattered most. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of certainty. She would survive not because of her title, nor because of her empire, but because she had been protected, guided, and inspired by a human. The galaxy had underestimated humans, and that mistake would have consequences the empires could not yet imagine. And somewhere far beyond Corrales, the Queen of Stars waited, unaware that her daughter was not only alive, but being shaped by the quiet, unyielding strength of humanity. The princess knew that when the day came to return, she would not be alone. She had learned the value of intelligence, patience, and moral courage. She had learned that a human could defy expectation and challenge the galaxy, not by weapons or armies, but by ingenuity, observation, and the unshakable desire to protect another. Corrales was still a lonely world, but she no longer feared it. She had a protector, a teacher, and a friend. She had learned what humans were capable of, and she knew the galaxy had never truly understood them. The lost princess had survived, not by chance, but because of the quiet defiance of a human heart. And the galaxy would soon learn that this defiance was not to be underestimated. The weeks on Corrales had taught the princess more than any academy, palace, or council ever had. Her body had healed, her mind had sharpened, and her spirit had grown stronger. She moved with confidence through the rocky valleys, climbing ridges and crossing streams, always under the watchful eye of the human who had become both her protector and her teacher. The galaxy beyond might think she was helpless, but she knew the truth. Her survival was not luck. It was the result of courage, intelligence, and loyalty, qualities she had learned from humanity itself. The human had changed too. He was no longer just a rescuer, he had become a strategist. Every day he observed the land, the skies, and the patterns of wind and shadow. He anticipated the moves of the alien scouts, knowing that if they returned, they would not come expecting subtlety but force. His confidence was quiet yet unshakable. The princess realized that humans were like rivers. They could be gentle, flowing through obstacles without force, but relentless in their course, capable of reshaping the land if left unchecked. One afternoon, as they rested on a high cliff overlooking a canyon, the princess spoke quietly. "They will find me eventually. My mother, the Queen of Stars, the other empires, they will not stop searching. How will we face them?" The human smiled faintly. "We don't face them the way they expect," he said. "We survive in ways they cannot see. They will underestimate us, and that will be their mistake. Humans do not always need weapons to protect. We use what we have: intelligence, patience, and the courage to act." The princess nodded, understanding. Her life among empires had taught her about titles, power, and rules. Humanity had taught her about choice, principle, and action. The galaxy's most powerful forces had assumed she was vulnerable. They were wrong. She was not just a princess. She was a survivor, and she was not alone. That evening, as the twin moons rose over Corrales, a signal arrived. The human had rigged a small array to scan for communications. The message was fragmented, distorted, but unmistakable. The Queen of Stars had discovered that her daughter might be alive. The empires of the galaxy were beginning to stir. What had been a secret was no longer. The princess felt a thrill of hope mixed with fear. She had dreamed of this moment for years, yet now that it was near, she realized how unprepared most expected her to be. She turned to the human. "They will come for me," she said. "They will," he replied. "But they will not find what they expect. You are ready." And we are ready. Over the next days, they prepared for the inevitable. The human taught the princess how to read patterns in the skies, how to anticipate movement, and how to use the terrain to their advantage. Every ridge, every canyon, every hidden crevice became a tool in their defense. The princess marveled at his ingenuity. Where she had been trained to command fleets, he trained her to survive and outthink opponents, using nothing more than their wits and the environment. Then one morning a fleet appeared on the horizon. Sleek ships moved with precision, their engines casting pale light over the rocky surface. The princess's heart raced, but she did not panic. The human stood beside her, calm as ever. "Remember what I taught you," he said. "They expect fear, they expect chaos. Give them neither." As the alien ships descended, the human guided the princess through a series of hidden paths, using shadows, reflective surfaces, and natural formations to conceal their movements. The ship scanned the terrain, searching for signs of life. The galaxy's most advanced technology could not detect the clever use of mirrors, natural camouflage, and subtle patterns of light and shadow that the human had devised. The princess was astonished. These were ships that could cross entire star systems, equipped with technology far beyond what humans possessed. Yet here, on a small, forgotten world, they were powerless to find a single human and a princess. The human whispered instructions, and she followed, her trust in him absolute. Hours passed, and the fleet began to withdraw, frustrated by the lack of visible targets. The princess realized then that the galaxy had underestimated humans not just once, but always. Their strength was invisible to those who measured power by weapons or numbers. Humans survived because they acted differently, because they thought differently, and because they refused to abandon what mattered most. After the fleet departed, the princess turned to the human. "They will not give up," she said. "They will return stronger with more ships. How can we survive them?" "We survive the same way we always have," he replied. "By being clever, patient, and loyal, by refusing to give up. The galaxy measures power by fear and force. Humans measure it by courage and choice. That is our advantage." The princess felt a surge of admiration and respect. She had grown up among the galaxy's most powerful rulers, yet she had never seen courage like this. The human's strength was not in weapons, but in his mind and heart. He protected her not because he was forced to, but because he chose to. That choice, simple as it seemed, was more powerful than any fleet, any army, any empire. Days later, the human set up a small signal device capable of sending a message across light years. The princess watched as he worked, curious. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I am sending a message," he said. "A signal to let your mother know you are alive. But not as a plea for help, as proof that you survived and that a human protected you." The princess felt a thrill of anticipation. She had feared that her mother would see her as weak, that her disappearance would be a stain on her family's honor. But the human was showing her a different way. She could return, not as a helpless princess rescued by strangers, but as someone who had survived, learned, and grown with the help of a human's courage and intelligence. When the message was sent, she felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Somewhere in the vast galaxy, her mother had received the news. The Queen of Stars, the most powerful ruler of all, would know that her daughter was alive. And she would also know that the one who had protected her was human. The days that followed were tense. Signals returned, confirming that the Queen's fleet was on its way, accompanied by envoys from other empires. The princess and the human watched the sky, not with fear but with quiet determination. They had survived worse, outsmarted the galaxy's best scouts, and learned the subtle strength of patience and ingenuity. They could survive this too. Finally, the day arrived. Ships descended into the atmosphere, careful but deliberate. The princess felt her heart race, but she did not falter. She had learned from the human how to remain calm, how to anticipate moves, how to act without panic. Together, they moved through hidden paths, remaining unseen as the fleet scoured the area. When the Queen of Stars' flagship finally approached the central canyon, a smaller shuttle was dispatched to find her. The princess and the human remained hidden, but she realized something remarkable. The fleet had underestimated her. They expected fear, they expected chaos, they expected weakness. Instead, they found patience, strategy, and the quiet defiance of survival. At last, the moment came. The princess emerged from her hiding place, stepping onto a ridge where the human stood beside her. The envoys and scouts below froze in surprise. Here was the lost princess, alive and unharmed, accompanied not by soldiers or warriors, but by a human. The human stood quietly, calm and unassuming, yet every motion radiated confidence. He did not boast, did not claim authority. He simply stood by her, A guardian and protector, proof that humanity's greatest strength was not measured by fleets or technology, but by courage, intelligence, and loyalty. The princess felt a surge of pride. She had survived not as a victim, but as someone who had learned, grown, and trusted a human who had risked everything to protect her. She stepped forward and called out, her voice steady and clear. "I am alive, and this human is the one who protected me." The words echoed across the canyon, reaching the ears of scouts, envoys, and the distant flagship. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the ranks. The galaxy had expected weakness, but it had found defiance. It had expected vulnerability, but it had found intelligence, loyalty, and courage. The human's presence beside her was more than symbolic. It was a revelation. He had protected her not because he had to, not because of duty, but because it was the right thing to do. That choice, simple as it seemed, had changed the course of her survival. It had rewritten what the galaxy believed about humans. And in that moment, the princess understood something profound. She had returned not only as a lost daughter, but as proof of humanity's quiet, unyielding power. She had survived, and she had been protected by someone the galaxy had always underestimated. For the first time in years, she felt certain that the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. They had underestimated them for too long, and now, through courage, intelligence, and loyalty, humans had changed history. The Queen of Stars would soon arrive. Empires would adjust their strategies, but the princess and the human had already shown the truth. Humans were not weak. They were capable of extraordinary things, and they had already made a mark that the galaxy could not ignore. The lost princess had returned. And beside her stood a human, the one who had changed everything. The ships of the Queen of Stars had arrived. The flagship hovered above the canyon, its polished hull catching the light of the twin moons. Smaller escort vessels moved in formation, scanning every corner of Corrales, yet none could detect the clever arrangements, hidden paths, and subtle signals the human had devised. The lost princess stood on a high ridge, the human beside her, both calm and prepared. She felt a surge of quiet confidence. She was not alone, she was not weak, and she was not helpless. She had survived the impossible. The shuttle from the flagship descended, careful and deliberate. From it emerged the Queen of Stars herself, radiant and imposing, her eyes scanning the landscape with the authority of centuries. She had heard the signal, the message confirming her daughter's survival. She expected to find a frightened girl, weak and vulnerable, perhaps in need of protection. What she found instead made her pause. The princess stood tall, her posture steady, her eyes clear and unwavering. Beside her was the human, the one who had protected her, guided her, and helped her survive. He did not kneel, did not bow, but he did not need to. His calm presence, quiet intelligence, and unwavering loyalty spoke louder than words. He had done what no empire, no fleet, no technology could have done alone. He had kept the princess alive. The queen's eyes softened as they fell upon her daughter. "You have returned," she said, her voice steady but touched with emotion. "I had feared you lost to the galaxy forever." "I am alive, mother," the princess replied, her voice firm. "And I am not alone. This human is the one who protected me." She gestured to the human, who remained quiet, as if acknowledging only through presence. A murmur ran through the queen's entourage. The human beside the princess was not royalty, not a soldier, not a member of any council or empire. He was ordinary, yet ordinary, they would soon learn, had achieved the extraordinary. The queen studied him carefully. She saw no arrogance, no fear, no sign of weakness, only calm, focus, and resolve. He had faced impossible odds and succeeded not by force, but by intelligence, patience, and moral courage. For the first time, she understood what her daughter had learned on Corrales. Humans were not as they seemed. They were underestimated, overlooked, and yet capable of feats the galaxy's most advanced powers could not predict. The princess stepped closer to her mother. "I survived because of him," she said. "Because of his courage, his loyalty, and his refusal to give up. Humans may appear ordinary, mother, but they are extraordinary in ways the galaxy has never understood. He has shown me that survival is not measured by fleets or weapons, but by intelligence, heart, and determination." The queen nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You speak truly," she said. "I see now that the galaxy has underestimated humanity for far too long. And I see now why my daughter has returned, alive and stronger than ever." The human said nothing, yet his presence alone conveyed his message. He had done what was right, not what was expected. He had protected a princess, defied advanced scouts, and outsmarted fleets with nothing but intelligence, observation, and determination. The galaxy measured power by fear, by technology, by dominance. Humans measured power differently, by courage, by loyalty, and by choice. The queen took a step forward, her expression softening further. "You have protected my daughter," she said to the human. "Not because you were commanded, not because you were rewarded, but because you chose to. That choice is more powerful than any fleet. You have shown me what humanity is capable of." The princess smiled. For years, she had feared returning, feared that her survival would be seen as weakness or failure. Yet now, she realized she had returned not only alive, but as proof of something greater. She had been protected by a human, and through that protection she had learned courage, intelligence, patience, and hope. She had survived because of human choice, human loyalty, and human ingenuity. The Queen's fleet remained in orbit, silent and cautious. Envoys from other empires watched, curious and uncertain. They had come expecting a helpless princess, a political negotiation, perhaps even a confrontation. Instead, they found something entirely unexpected. A princess who had survived alone for years, and a human who had protected her through intelligence, strategy, and loyalty. The human stepped forward slightly, still calm, still unassuming. He did not seek recognition, yet his actions spoke louder than any words. The galaxy was witnessing something profound. Humanity's strength was not in weapons, fleets, or technology. It was in the courage to act, the intelligence to plan, and the loyalty to protect others when no one else would. The princess turned to the human, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You have done what no one thought possible," she said. "You have kept me alive, taught me, and shown me what humans are truly capable of. I am forever in your debt." He shook his head gently. "I did what anyone would do," he said. "I helped because it was right. That is all humans need to survive. That is all humans need to be extraordinary." The queen studied them both, a quiet admiration in her gaze. She realized that the galaxy's understanding of strength, power, and intelligence had been incomplete. Humans were underestimated, yes, but their refusal to give up, their ingenuity, and their moral courage made them forces that could not be ignored. One human had protected a princess, outsmarted advanced scouts, and defied the expectations of empires. That was proof enough. The princess felt a swell of hope. She had feared returning to her mother's empire as a victim, but now she returned as a survivor, as someone who had learned from humanity. She had returned as a testament to courage, loyalty, and intelligence. And she knew that the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. Over the following days, the queen and her advisors debriefed with the princess and the human. The princess spoke openly of her experiences on Corellis, of the human's guidance, and of the lessons she had learned about patience, observation, and courage. The human's humility contrasted with his extraordinary actions, and the queen realized that humans were not just survivors. They were teachers, innovators, and guardians in ways the galaxy had never anticipated. The envoys from other empires listened closely, their skepticism giving way to awe. They had expected a helpless princess, and instead they saw a living proof of human ingenuity and courage. The galaxy's understanding of power was changing, slowly but undeniably, because one human had acted rightly when all others had underestimated him. Finally, the day came when the princess stood beside her mother before the assembled fleets. Her voice was steady, clear, and unwavering. "I have returned," she said. "I have survived not because of fleets, armies, or titles, but because of a human who protected me." Humanity may be young, underestimated, and overlooked, but they possess courage, intelligence, and loyalty that no empire can ignore. They act when it is right, and they do not abandon what matters most. The silence that followed was profound. For centuries, the galaxy had measured strength in predictable ways. It had been blindsided by the quiet, unyielding power of humanity. One human had proven that loyalty, courage, and intelligence could outweigh empires. The galaxy had been shown that humans were capable of extraordinary things, and that their strength could not be ignored. The queen stepped forward, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You have survived," she said, her voice filled with pride. "And you have returned not only alive, but stronger and wiser. Humanity has shown what it is capable of. The galaxy will remember this day." The human remained by the princess's side, quiet but present. He did not seek praise, yet his actions had spoken volumes. Humans were no longer to be underestimated. They could survive, outthink, and protect in ways the galaxy had never imagined. The princess looked at him, gratitude and respect shining in her eyes. "You have changed my life," she said. "And you have changed the galaxy's understanding of what humans can do," he smiled faintly. "I did what any human would do," he said. "We survive by acting rightly, by protecting others, and by refusing to give up. That is our strength. That is what makes us extraordinary." And in that moment, the lost princess, the human who had protected her, and the Queen of Stars understood something profound. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for centuries, but that underestimation had been their mistake. One human, acting with courage, intelligence, and loyalty, had rewritten the rules. The fleets and envoys departed, carrying with them the story of what had occurred on Corrales. Across star systems, whispers began to spread of the human who had protected a princess and outsmarted entire fleets. The galaxy began to see humans not as weak or ordinary, but as capable, cunning, and extraordinary in their own way. The princess had returned, alive and wiser. The human had demonstrated the quiet power of humanity, and the galaxy had been shown a truth it could no longer ignore. Humans were not to be underestimated. Corrales returned to its quiet state, the winds whispering across the rocks as if acknowledging the extraordinary events that had taken place. The princess stood on the ridge, the human beside her, and for the first time in years she felt complete. She had survived. She had learned, she had been protected by humanity at its finest. The galaxy had learned something too, and from that day forward, humans were never again seen as ordinary.